But you have to guess out of 26 options.
Yeah.
If you remember all 26.
I was pretty prominent, figured I knew what yesterday's was. There's been a couple I haven't had too much ideas on. Like I didn't guess that McKenna was McKenna. Like I forgot that was in it and didn't think anything of it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that sucks about it is that Dan tries to fucking talk to me every day.
You usually send me a message. And then I have to tell you how far wrong you are, is the funny part.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
And tonight we are continuing our Big Six series. And Dan is going to educate us on Wild Turkey tonight.
I remember when we first started, when we relied on you for all of our information, and you even had the nickname of Professor.
I know.
And then the one day you try and override me from my research, like it just like I know you apologize for being wrong, but I just feel like the credibility of the podcast going all the way to the start is now tarnished because of you.
No, I did really good research in the beginning.
Okay, so you're just phoning it in these days.
Yes. Well, I can't produce and
that's what
research,
we like to hear from
Dan.
a producer. Just gonna phone it in.
Jesus.
Yeah, so Wild Turkey, I will say of all the ones that we're going through, I've by far and away had the least amount of Wild Turkey compared to all the other ones.
I am least familiar with Wild Turkey out of all of these.
It's a shame. I think it's one of the most underrated and not talked enough distillery.
Yeah, that's kind of the feeling that I get is they're kind of like the afterthought of the Big Six. Why? I'm not entirely sure.
Which is weird because just like Buffalo Trace, they produce a lot of different expressions that are all really, really good, and they're very affordable. If Russell's 10-year ever, went on shortage, it'd probably be just like Eagle Rare. It's a 10-year bourbon, 90 proof, $35. Like, why aren't people going crazy over that? Just because you can walk into a store and find it. Same with Wild Turkey, rare breed.
Yeah.
That's part. I think rare breeds, some of the rare breeds are, sometimes they're not in at least. I'm not I'll start off by saying I'm not a huge fan of Russell's 10-year. I've had it a few times. Once you had it in a blind at Gold Eagle against Eagle Rare, and I picked heavily against it. And then we had one in our Advent calendar that was probably one of my lower ranking whiskeys that I've had in the Advent calendar.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the regular Russell's 10. The Russell's 10 single barrels I've had have all been very good, though.
Single barrels are really good, and those are completely different, though, than the regular 10. I will say there's something a little bit different about the regular 10. It's got kind of like maybe too much fruit and doesn't have those traditional like caramel and vanilla notes that people are really looking for. But still, I think for sitting on the shelf, $35, find me another 10-year bourbon that's sitting on the shelf under $50.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we can talk about the distillery here a little bit. It's one of those where I think part of it is just because of why people think of it secondly compared to a lot of the other ones is it's not necessarily nearly as old. Now, when you go through their history, it does have like we are tied to this, that was tied to this, that was tied to this, that was tied to the 1800s, 1900s. But this is one that reminds me, like when you're reading through the history of it, it makes you think of every single little tiny podunk Kentucky distillery in the early 1900s has kind of gone this way. There's a lot of buyouts. There was a lot of this person owned it, this person owned it. When you look at what they say on their website is kind of their history was in the 1800s. The Rippies or Ripies started distilling. Did we lose Jake? We lost Jake.
Yeah.
Pause. All right, now Jake is back. Good to see Jake Gold Eagle back here.
Never went anywhere.
There was no technical issues that were edited out, and then no random ranting by me and Jake while he was not here. So as we were just discussing about 5 seconds ago about wild turkey, it goes back to the 1800s. The Rippies or the Ripies started distilling on Wild Turkey Hill in Kentucky, and I mean, it's no longer a distillery. The new Wild Turkey distillery is basically built on those exact same grounds at this point. You could weave a web is the word I wanted to say. Weave a web.
Isn't that in the jungle? The mighty jungle.
This is starting off great, guys. Like if you wanted to Charlie Day this and Always Sunny with the who is Pepe Silva, you could do that to say that wild turkey goes back to the 1800s. But really, the best of like going back as far as you can really go without going through a million and one different conspiracy theories to get there. In 1934, Austin Nichols started sourcing American whiskey and selling in his grocery store. So he was a grocer and had a grocery company. And he started selling whiskey there. It was all sourced. They weren't distilling anything. And then in 1940, one of the executives was on a hunting trip for turkeys. And he brought some of the whiskey that they were selling at the store. And they decided to start calling it Wild Turkey because of the hunting trip. So the actual name of Wild Turkey predates really the distillery. At that time, in 1954, Jimmy Russell started working at JTS Brown and / Boulevard Distillery. Boulevard Distillery ended up being bought out by Austin Nichols. In 1971, that happened. And at that point, they renamed it to Wild Turkey Distillery. So before that, it was basically the JTS Brown Boulevard Distillery. It was owned by a grocer. Jimmy Russell started working for JTS Brown. They start their new distillery called Wild Turkey in 1971. At that point, they stopped sourcing and creating their own things. Since then, there's no crazy fire stories. It's past prohibition, so there's no crazy prohibition stories with them. They just kind of started expanding their brand a little bit. Like in 1991, they released Rare Breed, being one of the first barrel-proof bourbons to hit the market. 2009, Campari bought them for, I think it was $575 million, which, I mean, there's a lot of small distilleries being sold right now for 300 some million. So Campari got a good deal on that back in 2009.
Absolutely.
In 2016, they hired probably the most famous creative director in the history of creative directors by a name of Matthew McConaughey.
That's a Roberto joke if I've ever heard one.
That was in honor of Roberto. So they had approached McConaughey about being a brand ambassador for him, and he wanted to be more, so he became creative director for the company. Not weird, shortly after, a couple of years later, they released Long Branch, which has mesquite smoke in it. Almost a nod to Texas. Yeah, that was more of that was one of McConaughey's projects, was to get his Texas into Kentucky whiskey.
Nice.
So, and they've been expanding with stuff. I mean, they've released the Russell's line and things like that. Obviously, Russell, named after Jimmy Russell, who's still the master distiller. He's the longest tenured master distiller of all time. Still technically co-owns that title with his son. So that's a little bit on the Russells. They've used the exact same yeast strain since 1950, possibly before then, which you see a lot with some of these older distilleries that have been around for 50, 60, 70, 100 years or whatever. They keep using the same yeast. They have their proprietary yeast. Their mash bills, they basically have their bourbon mash bill and their rye mash bill. Their bourbon mash bill is 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malt. And that would be all your Wild Turkey bourbon brands, your Russells, your Long Branch.
So another one that only has one mash
bourbon,
bill.
Bourbon mash bill. They have their rye mash bill for
Yeah.
Wild Turkey rye and Russell's rye. Their rye is a 65% rye, 23 corn, 12 malted barley.
It's pretty high barley content in both of those.
Yeah, usually around 10.
Not crazy, but yeah.
I mean, 2%. So
far from the 5%.
I mean, 2% is kind of a landslide. So we'll call it there. But yeah, it's
got all the jokes today.
Got all the jokes. Always got all the jokes. But I don't know. I've had Rare Breed, which I do enjoy. I haven't bought a bottle. I almost bought one before today, but I've realized I've been trying to cut the collection back a little bit, so I didn't buy one. Like I said, the Russell's 10 I haven't been a huge fan of. I have never tried one of their single barrels, and I'm sure there's some great single barrels that have gone through Gold Eagle.
We've actually only had the honor of doing one, but the single barrels that we get just from like Jimmy and Eddie picks, I mean, they're really, really good, and they're always very different. That's one of the things I love about Russell single barrel picks is they're very different from one to another. And a lot of people do like to kind of match up what rickhouse it came from with the flavor profile. And then we can't forget probably the most underrated daily drinker of all time, Wild Turkey 101.
101, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
definitely killer old fashioned with the rye.
It's fantastic. Haven't tried it with the rye. But Wild Turkey 101, I think, is unfortunately why they sometimes get a bad rap. I hear it a lot when I'm talking with customers and trying to recommend like a replacement for E.H. Taylor small batch. I usually go to Wild Turkey 101, and a lot of the pushback I get is people are like, "Oh, that's what I shot in college," or "That's what my grandfather."
I was just say it's a grandpa bourbon.
Yeah. So I don't think people have given it like a second chance or a fair chance to sit there, pour it properly, because it is, in my opinion, the best $20, probably just the most overlooked $20 bourbon that's on the shelf. Quick story, when I was first starting to do blind tastings at the store, I reached out to the Adventures Club to get some ideas because they start every meeting with a blind tasting. And what they said was just put Wild Turkey 101 in there. It will never lose. And I have.
Has it ever lost in a blind tasting?
I've only put it in there a couple times, but yeah, it's never lost.
Well,
it's only like 2-0, but it was the first thing we put up against E.H. Taylor, and it took down Taylor, and then all the blind tastings exploded from there.
Gotcha. I believe that. I feel like from the turkey products I've tasted, it's a tad more complex than Taylor is, and Buffalo Traces in general.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the Wild Turkey stuff has some kind of like dusty, like funky kind of note to it. And it varies a lot in its intensity from product to product, but that's always one of those things that really like adds some sort of like interest or complexity to the flavor profile.
It's honestly, if you pour it in a glass next to Taylor small batch, they are very similar, like surprisingly very similar. And that's what I tell people to do when they're obsessed with Taylor and, you know, come in asking for a bottle. I'm like, take a Wild Turkey 101, take it home, pour it next to the Taylor and compare it. I guarantee you will like the Wild Turkey 101 better. They taste pretty similar, but yes, there's more complexities. The finish lasts a lot longer on the 101. So yeah, I think it's just a very underrated everyday option.
Yeah, I'm drinking this Kentucky Spirit single barrel from 2022. And this has a absolutely killer finish. and it's 101 proof. So it's probably just Wild Turkey 101 single barrel, basically. But it's very good. Like I said, this finish is really long and really great.
Jake, how can those people go home and compare it to Taylor if they don't have a bottle of Taylor because they can't get it at your store because you won't let them in their back? You won't let them in the back room to get one.
You can come in our back room tomorrow if you want, Dan. There will be no Taylor to be found. I promise you that. Well, this particular scenario happened a couple days ago with a guy who said, "Oh, I only have a little bit left in my Taylor, and I'm saving it for when I find another bottle." So, but yeah, if you don't have a bottle, I can't really help you right now. But don't worry too much. You're not really missing out on much.
There's alternatives.
There's definitely alternatives.
Something to hold you over till you find your next $90 bottle of Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
When we did our Lexington trip a year ago, when we went to a bunch of Lexington distilleries, we didn't end up going to Wild Turkey. Obviously, you drive through Lawrenceburg, you see all the signs and everything for it. And it's one of those things where you're like, man, I really wish we could have had time to go to that distillery, time or sobriety to go to it, I guess.
You could see their rick houses from Four Roses.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've only been there once. I just popped by real quick, and they were kind of under construction with their new gift shop. And it seems like, from what I've heard, that's been going on for a few years. So not really sure what's going on there, but I didn't really get too much of an experience.
I pulled up on maps to see where it's at, and it still says temporary gift shop. That's when you pull it up.
Yeah, it's wild. They built a whole new gift shop a year ago, and then 3 months later they closed it down for construction, and now they're redoing it again.
Yeah. Maybe they need to expand again.
I don't know, but
because where does Wild Turkey rank in terms of output, Dan?
I saw their numbers. I didn't check and see.
They got to be
700,000 barrels, I think. Let me pull that up. I remember just seeing that number, but it could have been another distillery I had to research for tonight as well.
They got to be like number, maybe not as much as Makers.
I'll look for it. Yeah, they are expanding. They added a $161 million expansion project to their current distillery.
And they've also kind of jumped on the train of doing a lot of experimental and more higher end releases lately, which is definitely cool to see. With obviously Russell's 13 year, the single rickhouse bottles. They're continuing their annual release of the Master's Keep. There was some kind of decades bottle that got released this year, but their special releases are pretty pricey too.
The Master's Keep stuff.
Yeah, I mean those are minimum. I mean those are almost up to $300 now, and I think the Generations one they came out with was like either $300 or $400.
Wow. Yes, that's probably up there with some of the most expensive special releases, barring like Pappy over 12 years.
So the still is a 5 foot wide, 52 foot tall still.
Wow.
So Buffalo Traces, I think, is 60 feet by 6 feet. I'm still trying to figure out the.
It's probably a pretty solid output then.
Yeah, I think it was 700,000 barrels a year.
Is Buffalo's number 1, Heaven Hill's number 2? Then it's probably either Makers or Wild Turkey that's number 3, I would think, right?
No, Beam was high. I think Beam is higher.
Oh, yeah, maybe Beam is number 3 or number 2.
MGP is higher than a lot of those as well.
Yeah, but they're not the big 6.
Oh, big 6. Okay, we're just talking about the 6. I can't find that right now, but I'll keep looking. The Rutledge family is kind of some of the godfathers of modern day bourbon, and they're still there doing it.
You mean the Russells?
The Russells. Jesus.
Jesus.
Sorry.
At least it was
that we're doing 2 different episodes tonight, and I have 2 different things I'm thinking.
Yeah, I had to think for a second. I was like, wait a second, you're wearing a Four Roses hat. Are we skipping around here?
I don't have any wild turkey gear.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't either.
I don't have any beam gear either.
The
Or
only
makers.
I've got some
like
beam gear.
we talked about. Oh, I don't have any beam gear either. Any?
Oh no, I have a
I think I had
Knob
some
Creek
extra
hat, but
beam
that's
gear.
it.
I was gonna say I think I have some Knob Creek hats and definitely some beam hats. I think I'll take a look.
Yeah, like we said though, I think part of the thing you get with wild turkey is that Grandpa's whiskey stipulation that people, I mean, like obviously people are now drinking more PBR and High Life than they used to drink. Ironically, half of them.
Hipsters.
We're not into ironic whiskey drinking because there's so much good stuff out there. So I think maybe 20 years from now the new age hipsters will go back to just normal wild turkey. But I think that's part of their issue is they have kind of that old style thinking to them, or what people think of them as more older people whiskey. Obviously, having McConaughey in there can help. But it's
I'd say they're building good hype around like the Masters Keep and especially around Russell's 13. So I think they're moving out of that like afterthought kind of category, and they're a little bit more at the forefront of people's minds now. I think the Russell's brand, I think has picked up a lot of clout just because of the 13 year was so good. For a few years in a row now, it's been highly sought after.
Yeah.
So, I think that's building some good brand awareness for them. And that always trickles down to the other stuff too. The 10-year single barrels are oh, Jake, would you consider them sleepers a little bit? But I mean, they're really
No,
good.
well, no, because they still sell out immediately whenever we get them. Like we just got 30 bottles of a barrel last Friday, and they were gone in less than an hour. So I still think people know about them. But I was gonna kind of transition into what I've noticed is that whiskey people who are really into whiskey love wild turkey, and people who are kind of dabbling and newer don't like wild turkey. And it's always funny because when you talk to someone who really likes wild turkey, they're usually going to tell you, shh, don't hype it up. Like, keep the secret down. We don't want the same thing that happened to Buffalo Trace to happen to Wild Turkey, where nobody can find any of this stuff anymore. So,
Yeah.
I think it's definitely proven that they have really, really good bourbon. I do think because of that Grandpa's bourbon stigma, they're kind of missing a lot of consumers that could be drinking 101 and could be drinking rare breed and the 10-year instead of chasing other bottles. But yes, it is good for people who really do enjoy wild turkey and know how good it is, because it leaves more on the table for us. I mean, like we talked about, you're not going to find a 10-year bourbon under $50, let alone $35, just sitting on the shelf. And you're probably not going to find, as good of a barrel proof blended bourbon as Rare Breed sitting on the shelf. That's one that continuously does really, really well in blind tastings too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Wild Turkey probably has to be the best readily available value on the shelf, right?
I would agree.
Is that it's hard to even like this single barrel that I've got. I mean, this was maybe $60. Like, I would be surprised if it was more expensive than that. And like Rare Breed is what, like 45, 50?
50, 55. The Rare Breed rye. A lot of the single barrels still do sell out, but I think I do agree. I think you compare them to like a Maker's Mark, Jim Beam. If we're talking the Big Six as a whole, um, I think for having one mash bill, it's very impressive how many categories Wild Turkey covers, and they're able to get their stuff on the shelf so that they are available. So yes, from an availability standpoint, I do think they're probably the most, probably the best option.
Mm-hmm.
I think for people that are listening, and especially people that are newer into whiskey, one of the big things that I hope you're starting to see through this series that we're doing is these big six that have been around forever. They might have one or two mash bills, and yet they can have dozens of different labels for products.
Yeah.
And it's all based off of the exact same recipe. And it just shows how much whiskey can change based off of aging, based off of where it is in a rick house. It's for new distilleries, it's find something that produces good flavor whiskey. And I mean, experiments are fun, but you can also produce a lot of really good whiskeys by just having one recipe and just really perfecting that one recipe. Because all these are the big six because they sell a ton of whiskey and they're doing it with very little change from one batch to the next.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show that the amount of time that these distilleries have had to really fine tune their recipes and their warehousing and their even like the positioning within the warehousing, allows them to do these like very interesting and very well differentiated expressions of the same mash bill in like almost every single case. So it is pretty cool. I've enjoyed doing this series, even though I screwed up some of the research.
I wouldn't even call what you did research.
Live on air fact checking that was also not correct. So.
On a non-reliable website. I do like how it's humbled you and kept you in your position, though.
I know.
It's one of the best things that's come out of this.
Kept me in my position as editor, producer. I'm just going to start cutting your entire track, and then the podcast
You're going to have like a 3-minute episode? A 3-minute episode with no fun. Sounds like a great producing work.
I'll just dub you.
No, I mean, go ahead, Jake.
I was just gonna say I'm glad we're talking about the Big Six, and I think we don't want to take away supporting smaller and especially local brands, but it's these are tried and true mash bills. There's a reason they only have one or two mash bills, and I think there's a reason too. Technology coming along is definitely part of it, but I think there's a reason too that newer distilleries are using so many mash bills because they kind of need something to get them to stand out, these creating 10 to 15 different expressions with one mash bill takes a lot of time because obviously stuff needs to age and you need to kind of blend it and get a reaction from people, see what people really enjoy. So I think newer distilleries are realizing like they can't come in and compete with Wild Turkey 101 price wise and quality wise. So they need to think out of the box, and that's why we're seeing places do a lot of different mash bills, more experimentation on the front end versus stuff on the back end because you don't really have time to experiment on the back end.
Yeah,
which I guess you don't really have time to experiment on the front end, but I feel like a lot of them are just like swinging the bat and hoping they hit a home run.
Yeah, I mean, we've got one left, obviously, which is Four Roses, and we'll probably do a nice wrap up at the end of that episode. But just to like drive the point home, like we're talking about these distilleries that have all been around for at least 50 years. Wild Turkey's 70 if it started in the 50s. So I mean, a lot of these are very old. They've had all this time to develop their recipes and perfect everything. And like for all the hype that I give Heaven Hill and all the shit that we talk about Buffalo Trace and everything, we
or you?
Not you. You're a fucking Buffalo Trace fanboy.
Sorry for liking good whiskey.
But I mean, at the end of the day, like we're splitting hairs on all of this stuff. This is all really good whiskey, and like it's hard to say that any of it's bad. Like you're a liar if you're calling any of this bad.
And kind of on top of that, if you're comparing these to newer distilleries and things, it's like you'll hear a lot of people drink a whiskey and say this tastes crafty. And basically what they're saying is this tastes like they haven't had decades upon decades upon decades to tweak this to get it to be exactly the way they wanted it.
Yeah. Go listen to our craft distilling episode for more on that.
But it's these guys produce really good whiskey, like all these things, like of all the ones we've had, all these big six we have. Someone gives me a pour of their normal stuff, I'm not upset about it.
Yeah.
It's a big thing today. I do wish I was more familiar with Wild Turkey products. It's just there's so much out there. It's one that I never got into quickly. Something I definitely want to keep on working towards. So I don't have as much to say. My experience is limited with Wild Turkey, but
Yeah, mine too. I haven't been disappointed in much that I've tried. So yeah, I mean, I will probably crack into it a bit more because what I've had recently is very, very promising. So yeah, I'm a fan, I would say.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend single barrel bourbon, single barrel rye are ones to keep an eye out for because consistently good and consistently pretty different from one bottle to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anything else on Wild Turkey for today?
No, it's good. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had like a better coupon code for Russell Single Barrel, but we just can't keep it on the shelf, and it's been that way for a couple years. So I think I'll just do a little one for Wild Turkey 101 because that's something that everybody should have on their shelf at all times, I believe. Just an easy everyday pour, something you can just pour and enjoy and not really have to think about. So let's do BM 101 for 10% off Wild Turkey 101. BM 101. But yeah, I think that's all I have on Wild Turkey.
Nice. Look at you just saving our listeners money all the time.
It's so nice of me.
I know. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Roberto never saved anybody any money.
No. If anything, I blame all of my money loss on him.
I mean,
I think you're not the only one in that house that feels the same way.
If you listen to every episode and you buy a bottle every week, you'll save a lot of money once the year's over.
You're not wrong. You would save so much money that you could buy a few more bottles with all the money you saved on the original ones.
Exactly.
That's math right there.
That's math. That doesn't lie.
Come to the blend off, and you'll have money to spend at the blend off. And
yeah, there we go. Let's plug the blend off.
Mm-hmm.
So January 13th, we will be doing a blend off at Gold Eagle. We've already posted the rules. Yeah, I don't think it's up yet, but it will be by the time this episode airs, probably.
Yes. Remind me if it isn't.
So the idea is that the three of us are going to make our ideal blends. Key points on the rules are that it's basically $80 or under bottles. And a bunch of other stuff. It's got to be a straight Kentucky bourbon. A few other rules.
But it doesn't get to be straight Kentucky bourbon, it's just a straight bourbon.
Or sorry, straight bourbon. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say Jesus, we're really starting to shoestring ourselves into a thing.
No,
Jesus.
Just straight bourbon. And then basically the rules were just put in place so Dan couldn't have his master distiller cheat and make him a perfect blend. So that's the goal. We're going to have a tasting at Gold Eagle on the 13th, and then everyone who's there is going to vote on their favorite. So be on the lookout for tickets for that. Those should be showing up soon on the Gold Eagle app and the Gold Eagle website, which Jake can tell you about now.
Yeah, goldeaglewine.com/events to pull up the event. Goldeaglewine.com/shop to shop. It's just a good website. Just go to goldeaglewine.com. And then download our app on the Apple App Store, Google Play Store. Just Gold Eagle Wine and Spirits. Shop online, see the upcoming events, everything, all the fun stuff. And then Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits, Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Keep up to date with what we got going on.
Yeah. I'm excited for this because I'm going to wipe the floor with you guys. It's going to be fun.
I'm excited.
Just like in fantasy football, huh, Jake? You're going to wipe the floor with me just like you did in fantasy football? Oh, wait, you're in the loser's bracket.
I was going to say, I've got nothing done yet for the blend off, but I'll come up with something good. Don't worry. And either way, it will be a really good time. So it would be even better too if we had like all Bourbon Matters listeners there. So maybe you know what, we will get this up by the time this episode airs, and then I'm not going to post about it. So I'm going to give you guys, all the listeners, a week or two to sign up before we post about it on our Facebook and Instagram publicly.
There you go.
Man, just all the perks.
Right?
So many perks in this episode. Why wouldn't you want to listen to us?
Why wouldn't you?
Well, don't answer that one. Let's just, that question was never asked.
But if you do want to listen to us, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and any other place that you listen to podcasts. Stitcher. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Leave comments, rate, subscribe, share, follow. Share the link with your friends. If everybody shared the link one week, we could like multiply our listener base tenfold, so that would be cool. Although we're doing 100
people
so.
listening.
I was gonna say 10 times 10 is 100.
So,
woo! All right, guys, one more to go.
One more. Four Roses coming up next.
You can't tell which the next one is.
Yeah, it's not like we're recording these back to back.
All right, cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.